When someone asks you to give the definition of story, what is the answer you always give?
Oh, wow. A compelling narrative with a beginning, middle, and an end, maybe.
Is story still king?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I say that on my website, right? Story is
I know,
king,
got
yeah.
that.
I think so. I was just listening to an interview with Steven Soderbergh today, and he said for him, his main litmus test is he has to hear about the story or read a script and say, hell yeah. He has to have the feeling that if he were to direct this, it's a hell yeah for him. So, you know, that story, your concept, your pitch, your log line, it has to make people say, oh wow, I really want to see that. You know, hell yeah, that sounds like a really good show or movie.
You think we've gotten away from that because now we have so many great visual effects and different things we can add in that we've lost sight of that hell yeah feeling?
I think in some ways, I think the big thing is that too many cliches are constantly put on screen in film and TV. Especially TV because there's so many shows, there's so many streaming networks. And so I think they are hiring filmmakers who maybe don't respect story as much, don't have as much experience with screenwriting and story. And their first move is to move something to the nearest cliche, you know, like an actor in a tense scene saying, "This ends now." You know, it's like, how many times have you heard that line, you know? But first-time writers might write that.
That was actually our next question. So I like that. In terms of the dialogue, that sounds very cliche. What about in terms of an actual story of, you know, whether it's a rom-com or a crime, you know, procedural? What is sort of cliche that we keep seeing over and over again?
Well, I mean, I think every genre has its cliche elements or beats, you know. The rom-com has the meet cute. And, you know, I feel like you know, I don't know if it's that I know it's coming or just that they make it that much more obvious now in movies and TV, the meet cute. It becomes more of a thing because it's kind of a term that's entered the parlance. But it's hard to make it unique and original, that meet cute moment between the two soon-to-be lovers. So, you know, it's hard. It's if it was on the page and you're submitting a script, you would want to come up with a unique way to do that, not just another cliche way of, you know, them bumping into each other on the street, or one of them is an architect and they're holding their model of the building, and the other person comes and smashes into them, and it smashes the whole thing, and oh my gosh, you're a jerk, you ran into me, but we all know in an hour and a half we're going to be kissing, you know.
So some of it is cliche, but then some of it is necessary. That we expect that in that type of in a rom-com, we expect, someone took someone's order at a coffee shop, and then they're fighting over it, and then the next thing you know, they're running into each other later, and yeah. Yeah,
so there's genre tropes, which you want to have. You just have to find a unique way to fulfill those genre tropes, you know. Horror film now, there's so many jump scares, right? And every kind of new low-budget horror movie I see, there's the person in the mirror, you know, when they open the mirror and they get their pills or whatever, and they close the mirror, and then there's a psycho behind them in the reflection. And yeah, it's an effective jump scare, you know, technique, but you can probably get around it. You probably don't quite need that exact shot, or somehow don't telegraph it too much so the audience doesn't know it's coming, you know? I mean, that's a challenge of a horror film, is like, how do you scare people when we know the conventions of horror movies? And that's what's gonna make your script or your movie stand out.
And then in action, what would some of how do you make your tropes not become cliche, let's say for action or drama?
Well, you definitely still wanna use the story map beat sheet, or, you know, find a beat sheet that works for you. So you're still gonna hit those signpost markers no matter what the genre is. But an action movie, I mean, I don't know, you just gotta find interesting ways for, like, the first appearance of the villain, to create tension and a ticking time clock. It's great to insert a ticking time clock at the midpoint or maybe end of Act 2. So find a unique way to have basically a countdown to the ultimate consequences, you know? So how do you create the stakes and the consequences? That's going to distinguish you as a writer.
Okay, so some of that, you need to have that tension in there, but then if the hero is kicking down the door and then two people are bound and gagged, and I mean that's sort of very
conventional.
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. So maybe you can find a more unique way around that. I don't know.
Sure, interesting. Where do most writers go wrong with story?
Well, there's a lot of ways to go wrong on the page with a screenplay. For me, I see a lot of too dense description, just too much description. I see a lot of explaining in description. If you're explaining what we're seeing, it's not as good as if you're just showing us what we're seeing on the page. So if you say, you know, Tom Cruise crosses the street, that's showing. If you say Tom Cruise thinks about whether to cross the street for a second, then he sees a red car coming and he decides he's gonna run and try to beat the car, right? You're explaining the motivations of the character. You don't wanna do that. I don't know why it just doesn't work on the page. Show, don't tell is like the biggest rule. Still applies. It doesn't matter how many years of filmmaking we have. It just still applies. So I see that a lot. I see just scripts that are dragged on too long, especially like the final act, a lot of back and forth. I say a lot of just keep it simple, stupid, find the focus, you know. You don't need so much plotting if we really care about the character and they're pursuing their goal against obstacles, and all of that is compelling and interesting and we're rooting for them. You don't need a 40-page Act 3 with constant reversals and tons of plotting happening, which I think is actually one of the problems with a lot of modern films, especially action movies. They just go on and on and on, and they're repetitive, you know, like how many car chases can you have in one film? And we've seen, you know, car chases for 100 years, you know. The recent Indiana Jones, I think it had at least one too many car chases. It just, if it feels repetitive, if it feels like you've already seen it in that script before, cut it and find another way to advance the story.
Do you think that's because, like, a lot of these focus groups, the people say, I love this car chase, and then, all right, guys, we got to put more car chases in, put 2 more in. You know?
Well, I think a lot of it is now they must be giving directors final cut more than they used to, I think. Because there's so many really long films. I mean, there's so many 2.5-hour movies. There's so many almost 3-hour movies. And I don't know anyone who's like, I want my movie to be 3 hours, you know? But I think because all of the companies, streamers, studios, networks, they're trying to hire those well-known auteur directors, you know, get a name director, because then they can get the budget and they can get the cast and everything. And that's great, they're talented. But I think they're maybe kowtowing too much to them and saying, you just deliver us the film you want to deliver, because 2 hours and 43 minutes might be too long, you know, for that story.
Now, I just rewatched Boyhood, and I love it. And I know some people said it's too long, but for me, that worked. But I get it. It was over many years that they did it, so you could see character changes. But another thing that I like that people don't is voiceover narration of the protagonist. I know that's kind of a no-no. Can you explain why that is?
For me, I feel like when I see it, it's covering up a lot of what could be just shown, not told information, and what could just be pure good storytelling. It's usually because they want to explain something. And like I said, you want to show, don't tell. You don't want to explain. So if you have to explain something in your story, well, then you might need to change it because it's not clear enough to the reader. And you don't want to use voiceover as just too much of a crutch to fill in story problems. It can work, but I see a lot of newer writers using it when they really don't need to. I